So in this segment, we're going to be talking about some bands skipping the UK because of Brexit, and this is a bigger problem than you would think. I'll be honest with you, and we'll talk about why, especially because it impacts a lot of the American bands as well. It's been 3 years since the UK enjoyed a full fixture of festivals, from local lineups to the likes of Glastonbury and Download. I've never heard of Download, but yeah, because of obviously the pandemic. While the restrictions have faded and the summer is rammed with events, industry figures are facing a fresh set of challenges they predicted back in 2019. One person saying, "Our festival was organically growing. Everything was working great." So evidently, his festivals, his business was doing very well. Adam Gregory, one of the directors of award-winning British rock and metal festival Bloodstock, very appropriately named, there was no real big blockades that we could say would stop a festival from being successful, because we had freedom of movement, and American bands are typically, they know how to get into the EU. Once you're in, you're relatively okay. Then came Brexit, and literally every barrier in the world went up overnight. And we'll be talking about some of those barriers in a bit. But so far with the musicians thing, we've talked about touring musicians, British ones going to the EU. We haven't really spoken about musicians coming to the UK and the problems that they faced. This is a whole other thing. And the government's kind of arguments around this are ridiculous. It's a sentiment echoed by musicians like Sir Elton John to smaller bands, that festivals are harder to put on and to play post-Brexit. While the philosophical arguments over leaving the EU have been fought and won, there are now practical problems that need to be addressed, like getting in the stuff. And they do talk about a carnet, which is a document. So one of the main issues of all size bands is they need a carnet, an international customs document, to be allowed to go between the UK and the EU with all their equipment, costing minimum £600. Now £600 might not sound a lot, but that's the bare minimum you have to pay. And for American bands to get into the EU before Brexit, they just needed one carnet, one set of documents effectively, to go to the EU. Now they need one to go to the UK, and I think another one to go to the EU, which is £1,200, is double. As well as increasing costs and paperwork for British bands wanting to travel across the Channel, EU bands wanting to come and play in the UK festivals face the same barriers. They face the same issues to come across here. And, ultimately the UK is a big festival market, but we are one. Well, to be fair, there's a union. There's 3-4 places you can go, countries you can kind of go tour, but at the same time, if it's not worth your money, it's not worth it. Bands typically, they do, like the one I follow, Starset, who are relatively smaller, were a smaller band when they came to Europe last time when I went. They did a couple of tours in a couple of shows in Scotland, a couple in England, and I think they might have done one in Wales, and they did a load of shows in the EU. Some bands that we know have actually not come to the UK because of the headache, said Gregory. They just can't be bothered with it. And it's more than that. The last thing you want as a band is your stuff to get stuck in customs. That's the last thing you want as a band, because if you have to miss a show because your stuff is stuck in limbo, that's a nightmare, because it's going to cost you a lot of money. Hiring a venue, refunding tickets, letting down fans, it's not great. It's not great. He says, "I'm not saying that it's a tremendous amount of money, but you only need one or two to start that momentum going, and all of a sudden the UK becomes one of those countries that just isn't added to the schedule." And the UK, they're going to charge UK festival, creators a lot more money to come to the UK, and it would be prohibitive for these festivals to put on these bands, which causes a negative spiral, because if you don't have the right kinds of bands, you're not going to be able to put on shows, if that makes sense, and less money. It's a negative spiral. Labour MP Alex Davies-Jones, who's been working with the festival directors on the issue, says if somebody on a European tour, normally they would have used the UK as a stop-off, bring their equipment, bring their set, do one of these festivals, and then head off onto the next destination, she says. And if you think about where the UK is geographically, it's a good spot for American bands to come into, because you can easily go to, say, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, these sorts of countries from the UK directly, and it's a shorter flight from America to the UK than it is to go to Germany, for example. That can't happen now. They're skipping the UK because it's just too complicated. It's different rules, different regulators, too much red tape, and it's preventing us from having these world famous acts at our festivals and finding new incredible music. Bands have to get carnets to literally list every instrument, packs of strings, battery packs and more, with the make and with the serial numbers, and that's all stuff you're going to have to look at, especially for some of these not solo performers but bands. They cost a lot of money. If they want to come through with their support acts are going to have enough money to do all of this stuff, and bands have a lot of equipment, especially rock bands. There's a lot of equipment they have. For orchestras there's a ton more, They're saying they had to pay a professional company to do that, and it cost them just under £1,000. I don't know how much they generate per show, but for smaller bands who do a lot more kind of small scale shows, £1,000 is a lot of money when you factor in everything else that's gone up in price. And the carnets only last a year, as well as only covering a certain amount of crossings. So if you think about it like this, right, if you need one carnet from the UK, one carnet from the EU, that's going to cost you a significant amount of money. Bands go on tour literally once a year, I think. So they'll do a whole tour in a year around Europe. They might do an American tour, a European tour, and maybe a Southeast Asia, an Asia tour, for example. And that's going to cost them a lot if they have to get another carnet to go through Asia as well. When bands head out, they have to join the queues with the truckers. So even when it isn't the case we've seen recently at Dover, we can be waiting for hours, says Miss Jones. And the fact is, again, if you're doing a tour, say, for example, on this day, the 5th of August, you're doing a tour in, say, London. You're doing a show in London, but in about 2 days' time, you want to do a show in Berlin. If your stuff gets stuck at the port, because not only does it have to go through the port of Dover, for example, right, if that's the route they're going on, not only does that get stuck in the queue in Dover, but it's got to go through customs, which can take a couple of days. So you can't do shows as quickly. The turnaround time's a lot slower, which costs you money because you still have to stay in a hotel. But we still have to wait in the queue with them, and they have to literally go through every single item we have. And again, bands have a lot of equipment, especially nowadays. Starset, they don't do shows, they do demonstrations, they call it. A lot of equipment is needed. Suits, space suits. They had one guy in a space suit, for example. One band saying we had to cancel our appearance at Resistance Festival in Spain because an airline lost our equipment, says Miss Jones. And that's crazy, that airlines can just lose your equipment like that. But it's a lot more difficult now because not only does it just go through the airport like normal, it's got to go through customs agents or customs officers, and so many different groups of people have to check everything before you get your stuff back. Alan Hungerford, whose company Freight Minds provides touring and logistical support, says, let's say you're doing a festival in Portugal on Saturday. To fly a charter jet into the UK on a Sunday for another festival is now incredibly hard work. These shows used to be fly straight in, straight out to the show, load in, go on stage, come off and go on again. Now you're losing hours. I can say realistically 12 hours for customs clearance combined. And if you think during the busier, I don't know if it's longer now, because during the busier times of summer, it could be more than 12 hours, especially when your stuff gets checked with other people's stuff, which is a security risk, but also a time risk. If there are multiple customs agents checking over loads of people's stuff, this can obviously have a knock-on effect on shows. British customs staff don't seem to have been trained properly on how to process carnets. That doesn't surprise me at all, that the British border staff don't have the expertise to deal with this stuff, because some of them wouldn't have to deal with a lot of these. It might be certain airports would have to deal with them, but not the airports going directly to the EU, for example, the ones closer to France, let's say. Miss Davies-Jones says organisers from both regional and mammoth events, including Glastonbury, told their number one concern was staffing. One is as a result of COVID. She says a lot of people end up having to go and get other jobs because the music industry shut down. A lot of these people would be sole traders or freelance staff, for example. Skilled staff like riggers, lighting engineers, sound engineers, techs, who have had experience putting all this on, left the industry, meaning you're losing that skill set. And the thing is, they can't be replaced with EU staff now because of no freedom of movement. The staff who are needed for the day in, day out running of an event, setting up the cleaners, security, the people who you rely on to run an event, were coming from all over Europe, she says. They're just not here now. And this was the kicker for me. They were expecting a crew on one night to turn up 52 people. Only 6 showed up, and I don't know why only 6 people turned up, but the reliability is a problem as well. Because not only can these people charge more because there's less of them, but because there are less of them, you don't have enough people to deal with stuff. If there are 10 vacancies or 15 vacancies and only 5 people to do the jobs, it doesn't matter how much they pay because you're always going to have vacancies and problems. This is very hard work unnecessarily for an industry that brings in billions of pounds annually for the economy. And that's true that some of these touring shows, the bigger acts especially, the ones that come in from the EU, they make a lot of money. They generate a lot of money for the UK exchequer because these shows, they generate a lot of jobs, etc. And for people to say, there's one guy who kept commenting, well, if they make so much money, why don't they pay for themselves? It's prohibitive. If you've got to pay a certain amount of money to come and do shows in the UK, you're not going to bother coming to the UK. And the thing is, with EU staff or sort of EU musicians, they have a lot of options to do touring in. And with Americans, it's the same thing, because if they need a carnet just to come to the EU, they can just nix out the UK, because despite the UK being a lucrative market, we are just one. There are 27 27 different kind of countries in the EU. Not all of them are wealthy, not all of them you'll be able to do shows in, but the majority of them you will be able to do it in. And they have a lot of different cities as well. Berlin, Munich, Amsterdam, for example, Rotterdam, all of these places you can go to do different shows in. They put the concerns, Sky put the concerns to the Department for Digital, Cultural Media, blah blah blah, which is all in one thing apparently. And what the government said is very telling, because they don't acknowledge what some of the key problems are. It goes 24 EU member states, including the biggest touring markets such as Spain, France, Germany, the Netherlands, have confirmed they offer visa and work permit free routes for UK performers and other creative professionals. You still have to apply for those, visa free roles. They're not, immediately free. They're still paperwork. But the problem is they don't actually mention the main issue, which is equipment, which is carnets. You still need a carnet to come to the UK, and for British musicians going to the EU, you still need a carnet. So what that means, effectively, is that we haven't acknowledged the key problem, which is moving the stuff around. Moving the people around is doable. You can get visa-free access. It's not exactly free, but okay, it's there, it exists. What about the equipment? If you're a band, for example, if you have multiple different guitars, mics, speakers, or whatever else they need, right, to have a show, and I'm not too musically inclined. My sister has a bass guitar and an amp, for example, and the cables. Let's not forget the cables and things like that, right? If you have all of that equipment, if you have to carry it around with you, it's very daunting, and everything gets checked. Any bit of equipment that gets lost, you can claim it through insurance, but the main issue is that it's going to take time to get that equipment back, and it's just a nightmare, I can imagine, for these companies. I despair, because the music industry is phenomenal. It brings in a lot of money for the Exchequer, and it's a great service that we have in the UK. The UK is great for touring. It's great for musicians, but now it's not so great. And if it's the case that they're already skipping us, it's just wild. And no doubt, other cities in the EU will do very well out of this. They'll have more bands doing tours there, which generates more money, more hotel stays, more venue hires, stuff like that, more local staff potentially being hired. I despair. I genuinely despair at this. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.